Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today on the bench we have another special guest. This is an Acorn A3000 and A stands for Archimedes, which is the series of these computers. I've got this computer from the Museum of Computing in Swindon, which is in Wiltshire in the UK. I was aware of the existence of this place, but for whatever reason I really never paid them a visit, and a couple of weeks ago I decided to pay them a visit. And I was massively impressed. It's a fantastic place, full of computers. Most of them are turned on and available for the visitors to use. And I really found this vibrant and passionate environment, which I have to say I was not expecting. And I met with the curator and I basically offered my help. The museum is a no-profit organization and I explained them what I'm doing as a hobby, repairing things, and I offered them my help in fixing things. So the idea is that I will, spend a little bit of my spare time at the museum just helping them out with whatever is needed, and also at times I might be able to take something home and do a repair for them, and why not, I can make a video out of it so you can also enjoy it. So first thing first, let me thank the museum and the curator for welcoming me in the community and for trusting me with this computer. Now, this computer, believe it or not, has something in common with your mobile. I will get to that in a minute, but it's quite mind-blowing. This computer comes from 1989. It's the last computer bearing the British Broadcast Corporation or BBC logo on it. As Acorn produced the microcomputer for the BBC back in the days, this was not really developed by the BBC, but somehow it was thought to be the legacy of the BBC microcomputer, so it still has the logo, but that's the last one bearing that logo. Now, the name Acorn apparently comes from the fact that the company wanted to be ahead of Apple in every directory. Now, coming back to the mobile thing, whether you have an Apple device or an Android device, they're all based on ARM CPUs, actually CPUs based on ARM architecture. ARM happens to be a British company, and guess what ARM stands for? It stands for Acorn RISC machine. So ARM was developed by Acorn, and this is the very first ARM computer which was released to the public. It features an ARM2 CPU. Now, I understand that ARM1 never made it to the public, and so ARM2 is actually the first one, and this has an ARM2 in it. And that means that the mobile that maybe you're using to watch this video right now has something of this little computer in it. I don't know how much, to be honest, but the architecture comes from this very first ARM computer. Right, enough me talking, let me show you what's wrong with this computer. Let me power up this computer so I can show you what's wrong with it. And here we are on the desktop of the computer. As you can see, it seems to be working totally fine, even though when I try and access the hard drive, I'm always getting this message saying this computer has not been started correctly and press Ctrl break. And when I do that, the computer basically restarts, but this time loading the operating system from the hard drive, and it comes with many more things available on the desktop. And you can see now that the computer has restarted. There's a background on the desktop, there's an app folder, a printer I think, and the hard drive is accessible. So the thing is, this computer seems to be working, so what am I repairing here? Now, to show you what's wrong with this computer, we need to take a look inside. So let me remove the lid and I'll show you what's wrong with it. But before I go with that, you might be noticing that I have, finally, a capture device. I ended up with the open source CAN converter, which is a fantastic device and is capturing right now the RGB signal coming out of the Acorn into a SCART connector at the back of the OSSC. Now, when I was selecting a capture device for my videos, I got in touch with Alex of Bit und Bolts, which is one of the YouTube channels I'm following, and the reason I got in touch with him is that his videos are always crystal clear, the MS-DOS is captured perfectly. It's absolutely fantastic. I just got in touch saying, what do you use? What kind of device you use? And Alex was incredibly helpful and explained me his whole setup, what to buy, what not to buy, what worked for him, what didn't work. And I have to say that Alex saved me quite a lot of time and I guess money. And I ended up with this combination of the OSSC and an HDMI capture device, which seems to be working perfectly fine. So really, thank you very much, Alex. You've been fantastic. Now, to my audience, please go and visit Bits and Bolts, because it's a great, very entertaining channel. Alex's videos are absolutely fantastic. Go and check them out, you won't regret it. But now, let's open the lid of this thing and see what's wrong inside. So this is the main board of the Acorn 3000. In here, there used to be a battery, as you can see, and as you can imagine, the battery leaked on the motherboard and caused a little bit of damage. There was a little bit of corrosion, it has been neutralized with vinegar, but what happened was that 2 of the 3 mouse buttons were not working. On this computer, the mouse buttons are actually hardwired to the motherboard, to this IC here. So obviously the leakage of the battery caused some damage, and that basically severed the connection between the connector here and the IC. So to fix the problem, a little bit of patchwork was done, and to be completely honest with you, it's not the best I've seen, so I'm not sure who's done it, but I really would like to rectify it and make it a little bit nicer.
Tony?
What?
It was you. It was you who did that patchwork.
Oh, it was me? Okay, I did it. Right, jokes aside, I was at the computer museum and I was diagnosing this motherboard with what I had with me, and I found the problem was here after these 2 inductors. There's a micro fracture caused by corrosion, which I can barely see. And again, I didn't have my soldering iron, I didn't have most of my tools, so I improvised with what I had, and that worked, to be honest. I mean, it's ugly, but that worked. Now, obviously, when you have this kind of battery damage, it would be nice to remove all the components, grind all the traces, make sure all the wires are okay, do something that probably lasts for, the life of the machine. For the time being, the priority for this machine would be to have it back up and running so it can be displayed to the public can use it, and hopefully, again, this corrosion is not causing too much trouble in the future. So that patchwork fixed the problem, but at some point I noticed that the ROM 3 here, this IC here, had quite a lot of green corrosion around it. So I did what everybody would have done. I just removed the IC, try and get rid of the green stuff, apply a little bit of vinegar or maybe contact cleaner or something. But when I did that, something kind of unexpected happened. So the IC is thankfully in great shape. The socket is not. So the corrosion has eaten up 4 of these pins. To be honest, this one I think has just come off. So when I realized this kind of damage, I thought, right, okay, I can't really replace this socket without a desoldering gun, hot air, and, my tools. So I agreed with the museum. I would just take it home, replace the socket, redo this patchwork, and hopefully, that would make the system reliable as much as possible. Now, I'm surprised that the system is actually working basically without the ROM. I mean, I'm not sure what these pins are, but clearly I'm not touching anything. I'm pretty confident that's not happening, and all the other pins are not in greater shape. But obviously, as you could see, it was working. If you know how this works, I'm not familiar with the architecture of this system. How is it possible that the system is working without this ROM? Is this ROM used for maybe something else? Maybe if I had run some apps, specific apps which are saved into this ROM, it would have shown an error, maybe? I'm not sure. If you know about that, if you want to leave a comment, that'd be great. Okay, so first thing first, I would say let's remove those inductors and also the socket. So as you can see, there's still a little bit of corrosion behind the at the back of the board. There's quite a lot of green stuff. I'll give it a good brush, and that's the legs of the inductors, which, as you can see, they're not in the greatest shape. So I'll do my best. Okay, that wasn't too bad. They came off pretty easily and completely. I don't have to do anything special for it. I always warm up the PCB when removing sockets or ICs. Maybe it's not needed with an old machine like this, but it never hurts, and hopefully that allows the desoldering gun to suck away the solder more easily. After adding some flux, I apply fresh solder on each pin. This usually makes the removal of solder easier. Then it's time to use the desoldering gun. Each pin is warmed up for a second or two to allow the solder to fully flow, and finally the pump is triggered. At the end, I wiggle the pins with a small screwdriver. That usually breaks any small solder bridges which might be left behind. And it worked! The socket came off with no effort whatsoever. Now the first IC socket is totally fine, but there is a little bit of corrosion here on number 2, number 3 we removed it, and number 4, again there's a little bit of corrosion there. I mean, considering it came out pretty easily, I'd be tempted to replace them all 3 just in case. Since I'm here, I think it's the wisest thing to do. Okay, here we are under the microscope, and as you can see there's quite a lot of residues from the corrosion, unfortunately. There's quite a lot of green stuff, but what I'm curious to check is this area here. There's no continuity between this and this. There must be a crack in here. So let me give it a clean, because I'm curious to see with my own eyes what's going on in there. Okay, well, I can definitely see the crack here. But the funny thing is, I don't see a crack in here. Well, let me check whether there's actually no continuity in there. I did check the other day, but let me check again. Maybe these brown stuff here is a crack? Let's check. If I'm checking between via and via, I have continuity. But if I'm checking between via and here, there is no continuity. There's a micro crack in there, which even my microscope can't see, because this is maximum magnification. I've now removed the Barlow lens to get a little extra. Where's that? 25% extra or something like that. And yeah, it's barely there. It's impressive how that little whatever that is can affect the continuity. Yeah, it's literally a micro thing. So maybe I can try and just make a smaller patch in there. While here on the right hand side, yeah, I mean, you can see this is severed here. Definitely what I want to do, I want to clean it a bit better, especially now we don't have the sockets. I will make sure that I brush it with isopropyl, make sure that there's no green stuff whatsoever left on this board. Hopefully that will help a bit. Okay, well, this is the outcome. I still have some green stuff inside the vias. I'm not sure there's anything I can do about that, to be honest. It looks a bit cleaner, so hopefully that helps. But for now, we can reinstall those inductors and do that little patchwork, and then we can go on and install the sockets. This is mains cable, is just one of those stranded mains cables, regular 1.5mm or something. I just removed the jacket and got one of these copper strand. The reason I'm doing this is not enameled, so it should solder a bit better. Okay, and this is done. So let me check continuity between the inductor and the IC. So this is working, and this is also working, so perfect. It's a bit better than it was before. I was working, but anyways. Now I see some corrosion into the keyboard connector. I guess it would be a good idea to try and get rid of everything. It's not much, but I would say it doesn't hurt to try and get rid of it. So I'll put a little bit of vinegar first. And it seems to be working, which is great, and thankfully I don't see damage. Well, I guess that will do, and now it's time to replace those sockets. Right, and I finally got the replacement IC sockets, so let's crack on and replace them. So before I repopulate the ROM sockets and test this machine, it's time to talk about this battery. Now, without this battery, the computer works, but obviously you're going to lose the RTC, and also I think you're also losing some settings, and that was the reason why I was holding the delete key at the beginning of the video, to force a video mode which is not compatible with my capture device. This battery here, which exploded, was a rechargeable battery, which means you have 5 volts coming in, trying to recharge the battery. If I replace this with a CR2032 battery, I can't recharge it. So that would need a diode to stop the 5 volts to reach the battery, and none of my adapters, to be honest, fit nicely here, so it's not going to be a nice job. That being said, I've spoken with the owner of the machine, and they would rather have a connector to fit an external battery, so it's easiest to replace. Now, what are the chances that this motherboard has already an unpopulated connector, which is called LK5, which is designed for an external battery, and the diode is also unpopulated, is this D1 here. So basically all I need to do is just to fit a connector here, fit the diode here, and that's it, and that's your external battery connector ready to be used. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to steal this fan connector from a scrap board I have, and I'm going to reuse the cable from the fan they used to connect on this very connector. And finally, it's just a matter of giving these ICs a clean, because if you remember, they were pretty green around the socket. Then I'll just put them back in the sockets. Now, I don't know this system at all, so I went online and educated myself a bit, because I wanted to learn a bit more on, what does what on this board. Now, the core of this board is the CPU, obviously, which is this ARM2 CPU. This is an 8 MHz CPU. Here on the right-hand side of the board, we have the memory controller, the MEMC, and close to the memory controller, obviously, we have the memory. The board comes with 1 MB on these vertically mounted ICs, which are pretty unusual. I'm not familiar with those, I've never seen on any other motherboards. On top of that, on this board, we have this memory expansion, which takes the total memory configuration to 4 MB. Here on the left-hand side, we know about that. We got all the ROMs, we have the mouse connector, the battery when there was one, we got the keyboard connector, and this is the keyboard and mouse controller. It is an Intel IC, it's an 8051, but this one is manufactured by Philips. More to the center, we got the IOC, which is the input-output controller. We got the floppy connector here. Behind the floppy connector, we have the floppy controller. And here on the right-hand side, we have the graphic chip, the VIDC or VIDC. And finally, here on the right-hand side, we have the reset button. At the back of the unit, we have something pretty interesting. This is called the Ethernet. Now, Ethernet, it connects to these two connectors here. It's an Ethernet module, actually a LAN module. I don't know how it connects to the outside world. That was the cheap version of Acorn to create a local area network. So with this module installed, then you can connect the computer through the network through this connector here. Next, we have a serial connector, but I understand that this is not going to work unless these two ICs are populated. That was another way for Acorn to keep the cost down. Now, the parallel port, I think it works. That's the print port. Finally, we have audio, we have composite monochrome output, and RGB output. And here on the right hand side, we have an external expansion, which works as this one here, which is called mini podule. Instead of a module, it's a mini podule. And this basically allows the user to install lots of different expansions. You have seen this one, which I removed when I opened the machine. This is a hard drive expansion, it's a mini podule. And I guess this is also a connector for an external hard drive. I'm not sure. If you know that better, just leave a comment down below. Well, I would say this should work, finger crossed. So I'll just put it back together, in this case, connect to the power supply, and hopefully we get a working computer, which, fair enough, it was working before as well, but obviously, hopefully it will work better. What can I say? Okay, I'm ready to power up in 3, 2, 1, go. Well, it's booting up, which is good. It's a good sign. It's loading the OS. And again, I'm not familiar with this computer and I haven't got the hard drive connected. So what I can do, I can try and open some apps. And it seems to be working totally fine. Now, again, this is where my knowledge of the system ends, to be honest. And I don't even know what to do to see whether that extra ROM is working or not. Because it was working before, I didn't really do many tests. Now we can see that the memory expansion is working because I have a 4 MB total of RAM shown here by the, let's call it, task manager. I haven't finished with the system. The next thing I'd like to try is to test the floppy drive, because that has not been tested. I have a few floppies for the system, so I would say maybe we can clean the heads and test the floppy and make sure it does work. Now, the floppy here is labeled Citizen. It's made in Japan. I thought it was a Sony, but it's not. It's a Citizen. And I guess it's kind of easy to open. There you go. So yeah, the floppy is in great shape. I guess I can remove a little bit of dust and we can clean the head with some isopropyl. The fastest graphics demo around, stunning psychedelic sound machine. We have to try this. Aha, Acorn User Magazine Disc. Amazing, look at that. Well, we have a little plot twist. I mean, it's a sad news, I've got to say. I was just closing the Acorn to just do an outro and close this video, and I think the hard drive failed. Because when I powered up, the hard drive spins and then it stops. Sometimes it spins up and down and then it stops. And I'm not sure whether it's a power supply issue, which I can check, but we do have a problem. Let me show you what I mean. It really sounds like he was struggling with power, but we only have 5 volts going into the machine, and the computer was actually running. Now this module is very easy. It's basically a IDE controller with an IDE drive. I think it's a mini IDE something. Not much I can do here because it's working, then it stops. I can inspect a bit. And what I like to do, obviously, as a minimum, I can just reset this cable, use some contact cleaner, and see if that sorts it out. I can check this capacitor, but I don't know, it was very, very weird. It's like that the whole 5 volts coming to the computer was kind of failing, but the computer was booted, so it can't be the 5 volts. There you go, just started. Okay. Okay, so let's quickly diagnose this hard drive problem. The first thing I want to try is I want to make sure that the 5 volts coming from the power supply is fine, is stable, there's no issues with it. So I got my probe connected to 5 volts and let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. And 5 volts looks, I would say, pretty fine. It's 5.1. Now the hard drive is disconnected at the moment. Now the next step would be to make sure that the 5 volts is reaching that connector there. And I had a look online, I could find the pin out. Obviously that also has power. Got 5 volts for the logic and 5 volts for the actual motor. And I'm now connected to one of the two and let's see how it behaves. 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah, it goes up to 5 volts. Again, this is also 5.1. Now let's check the other 5 volt supply and let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. This also looks totally fine. I don't see any ripple or anything. So that is also totally fine. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got another hard drive, but from what I see there, it sounds like the hard drive is faulty. But the fact that it's like going up and down, it's spinning up and down sometimes, not all the time, it makes me think that there might be some connection issues. So before deciding that the hard drive is gone, I'd like to take another look at it. Right, I was doing a visual inspection of this and I might have found a problem. Look at this. There is corrosion here and I'm not entirely sure where it's coming from, but there's definitely corrosion. Let's remove this board and see what's behind it. But hopefully we can save this. And would you look at that? Something happened on these Adaptec IC. I can't find the data sheet of it, so I can't really say what these pins are for. Let's zoom in a bit. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. That is gooey. Right, let's try and give it a clean. Whatever happened there, I have absolutely no idea. But let's try to give it a clean and see what happens. Well, it cleaned up pretty well, so at this point I would say let's reflow these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pins, and hopefully there is no more damage, and hopefully that was the problem. Well, this is just so much better than before. I hope the traces are still good and, you know, the solder is still making contact. Before we test the hard drive again, let me double check that all the other pins are properly connected to the pads. Right, everything is good, so I'll put this back together and finger crossed, that was the problem. Okay, well, the hard drive is back in one piece. I didn't reconnect it to the board. For now, it's just insulated by this plastic bag. I'm really curious to see whether that fixed the problem. So let me move the microphone close to the hard drive so you can hear it, and then I'll power up. 3, 2, 1, go. Well, it started straight away. And it's working. I'm really happy. Well, unless it's a coincidence, it started up straight away, no issues, no spinning up and down. It loaded the operating system straight away and it seems fine. So pretty happy because, you know, just replacing those sockets was kind of boring. This was a bit more, okay, what's happening here? I need to look into that. Now I can put the hard drive back and do my outro. So I went to close the lid of this computer to do my final test and do maybe an outro, and believe it or not, this computer has died on me again. Now this time it's a different fault, let me show you. So I'm powering up the computer now. And as you can see, I'm greeted by this red screen, and it stays on screen for about 30 seconds, and I thought, I don't remember seeing that, and after that, it drops me to the supervisor. Now, if I understand correctly, supervisor is a sort of Apple II's monitor, or maybe if you want to think of a MS-DOS behind Windows 3.1. So it's the basic system running behind the desktop. And I was very stuck in here because, as I mentioned, I know nothing about this machine, so I didn't know what to do. But thankfully I found this forum. It's called stardot.co.uk. And I found a little bit of help and a little bit of information there. And what I've learned there is that when the machine is outputting a red screen, it means that the power on self-test has failed. And the machine has a way to communicate an error code to the user. And the error code is communicated via the floppy disk LED light. Now, the error message is communicated to the user in binary. So you have short flashes and long flashes. And by doing that, you can then input your error code onto this website. There's an error code calculator, and an error code comes out with actually readable error messages for a human being. And the error message, the main error message that the system is now communicating to me is CMOS unreadable. So when I saw this error message, I thought, right, okay, one of the ROMs has failed. So I started tinkering with them, reseating them, using Contact Cleaner and checking things around, but nothing happened. And I've asked for some help on the same forum, and they explained me, no, the CMOS is not the ROM. The CMOS is a little IC which is close to the battery. If I understand correctly, is where the system is storing like the basic settings. And that is the reason why I had to hold delete to get video output out of this machine. And the reason is that by holding the delete key, I'm telling the system to clear the CMOS, which otherwise would wake up in a random state. So first thing first, I now have a battery, a case in here, which is going to be outside of the case as the owner of this machine wants, and it's ready to go on the motherboard. I'll plug it in a minute. And secondly, it looks like we need to take a look at that IC. Now, I'm told that that IC rarely fails, and especially when you have battery damage, being very close to the battery, that's probably where the problem is, which makes totally sense. If you remember, I said at the very beginning, this system is not going to be super reliable over the years because of all that damage. So I would say, let's take a look at the IC and all the traces around it. And this is the IC in question, that's where the battery was. So first thing first, let's check with my multimeter, which is in continuity mode, that everything that I see here on the PCB is actually working. So I'm checking from this pin to this wire, and it works. Then I can see there's a trace here, which works. There's a trace here, which works. This one is going to this capacitor. And let's also check that from this capacitor we go to this wire here. And it works. Then we have a reference clock here. So let's check from this pin here to the clock and this one to the clock, and it works. And that's it. There must be something else, which it's either under the IC or behind the PCB. Now, before I turn around the PCB, I'd like to check that this IC is actually getting voltage, is getting a clock, because the pins I'm looking for to communicate with the rest of the system is pin 5 and 6. So that should be 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So let's have a look at that with the oscilloscope. So the first thing I want to do is to make sure that we get some voltage, which is pin 8. And let's power up. 3, 2, 1, go. And we do get voltage, which is, I think it's fine. Now, the next thing I want to check that the clock is coming to these 2 pins here. Right, we have it's a bit on the weak side, but I hope it's expected. But it is 32.7 kilohertz, as it should be, because that's the 32.7 kilohertz crystal. Now, looking here at the schematics, the communication protocol, which is I2, is pin 5 and 6, and these are called C0 and C1. And I found C0 and C1 on the IOC, which is input-output controller, on pin 44 and 45. You can see I2C bus. Let's check that we have continuity between these 2 pins from the IOC and the other 2 pins from the CMOS. And bad news, it looks like there is continuity between the IOC and the CMOS. So I'm not sure. Either that clock signal is not great, or the CMOS has failed. So I'd say let's order a new one. The replacement has arrived. Let's take a look together to make sure it's the right component. And here we have a PCF8583P, which is exactly what we're looking for. Now I have the sockets installed, and I'm going to install one to make things a bit simpler. Right, here we go. Will it work? Well, let's check that out. I'm gonna hold the delete key, so that will wipe the CMOS and replace the content with, I guess, default values. And let's turn it on in 3, 2, 1, go. Yay, we don't have a red screen. Look at that. That's the CMOS being deleted, the red frame. And it's booting. There's no hard drive, so it's reading from ROM. It's working! Look at that! It was the CMOS, look at that. Well, it's kind of understandable as it's very close to the battery. Right, do you think that now I can put the lid back? And this thing is not going to fail on me for my outro. I'm gonna do that right now. I'm gonna fit the floppy drive, the hard drive, put everything back together, including the battery, and make sure that everything works. And then I'm gonna do my outro. Before putting the lid back on, I thought, let's test it. Everything is connected. I really just need the lid on. Past 2 times I put the lid on, something happened. I thought, let's make sure that everything works first. Let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. Hard drive spun up straight away. There's a IDE drive being detected, which is great. This is the first time I'm powering up with the hard drive. Now I can see it hasn't loaded from the hard drive, so I'm hoping that this is because it's just the first time. So if I'm not mistaken, if I'm loading the hard drive now, it will tell me that it hasn't shut down properly. Perfect. So control break. And my hope is that after this, it won't happen again. And it worked totally fine as expected. You can see it's loaded from the hard drive. There's a background, there's an apps folder, I think it's a printer. So now let's try and power off properly from here, shut it down. And then I'll power cycle it and I'll see what happens. Right, power up again in 3, 2, 1, go. And it worked totally fine. So it was the CMOS. So without the CMOS, this system basically starts up blind. Got lots and lots of parameters missing. Now on the stardot.org.uk forum, they basically explained me that the RISC operating system is saving quite a lot on that CMOS. Other operating system might save on a file, on an ini file or config file or something like that. The RISC saves quite a lot on that CMOS. In fact, that CMOS contains 200 separate parameters, which can be, the video format, the hard drive, the configuration of everything, the files that need, the modules that need to load when the operating system starts. So that is why without the CMOS, nothing would work, or it would work erratically, as we've noticed throughout the whole video. I wasn't aware of that. To be honest, I thought it was just the clock. But no, it's also the clock, but it's also the main configuration file for the whole computer. When I started this video, I thought this is going to be boring. I only have to replace a couple of sockets and maybe a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of scrubbing. It's not really interesting. It doesn't feel interesting. But then the hard drive failed, the CMOS failed. So, this kind of boring video actually turned into a proper repair video. And I have to say, I had quite a lot of fun, not only repairing all the faults, but also learning about the system, because I know nothing about it. I still know nothing about it, don't get me wrong. And I hope you also had fun following me in this adventure. Well, there's only one thing left to do before I finish this video. You know what that is. And would you believe it? It's still working. So I would say, let's close the video as soon as possible before something else happens. Now, jokes aside, this is really it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as usual, I'd appreciate if you could hit the thumbs up down below, and also consider subscribing to this channel if you like this kind of things. Also, if I can ask you to leave a comment, any comment, just to, tell the algorithm, yes, I like this video, I'm here. I like Tony359's channel. That would be great. For now, that's it. Thank you for watching. I wish you a great day, and I hope to see you again soon here on this channel for my next videos. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Bye-bye.